At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about the room. It looked like hundreds of other congressional hearing rooms that exist across Washington. Neutral colors, heavy desks, microphones positioned with bureaucratic precision. The kind of place where history sometimes happens quietly, without anyone realizing it in the moment. Cameras were already rolling, but not with urgency. Staffers moved in practiced patterns, distributing papers, whispering reminders, adjusting seating. Lawmakers settled into their chairs with the familiarity of people who had done this many times before. To most viewers, this hearing promised to be routine. Another long session. Another exchange of talking points. Another forgettable day in American politics. But routine moments are often where tension hides best. There was something subtle in the atmosphere, something not written into the agenda. A tightness in the pauses between conversations. A carefulness in how people chose their words before speaking. This wasn't visible drama. It was the kind of tension you feel before anything actually happens, when nothing has gone wrong yet, but everyone senses that something could. Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, listening. She wasn't dominating the room. She wasn't competing for attention. Her posture was steady, composed, almost still. She watched the flow of the hearing the way someone watches a chessboard, less interested in the first move than in how the game would unfold. Crockett had built a reputation for precision rather than volume. When she spoke, she chose her words carefully. When she stayed silent, it was intentional. Across the room sat Marjorie Greene. Her presence carried a different energy entirely. Greene was known for confrontation, for leaning into moments rather than away from them. When she spoke, people noticed, not always because they agreed, but because her delivery demanded attention. She flipped through documents, leaned toward her microphone, adjusted her posture with visible readiness. Greene didn't wait for moments, she created them. Two lawmakers, two styles, two very different ideas of power. At this stage, though, none of that had collided yet. The hearing moved forward slowly. Opening statements stretched on, committee rules were restated, formal language filled the room, careful, procedural, predictable. To an outside observer, it might have sounded like background noise, the kind of political rhythm people half listen to while doing something else. But beneath that rhythm, patience was already thinning. Small signals began appearing, a sharper tone here, a brief interruption there. Nothing dramatic, just enough to suggest that frustration was building quietly, layer by layer. These weren't outbursts, they were warnings, the kind that go unnoticed until they suddenly matter. Cameras kept recording, as they always do. In Washington, the most significant moments rarely announce themselves. As one lawmaker finished speaking, another leaned forward to respond. The tone sharpened just slightly. Words became more deliberate. Pauses stretched longer than necessary. The conversation still sounded like politics, but it no longer felt routine. Crockett remained quiet. She watched. She waited. She didn't rush toward the microphone. There was no visible irritation on her face, no eagerness to jump in. If anything, her stillness stood out more as the room grew restless. It looked like restraint, but it was also strategy. Then Greene began speaking again. Her voice carried more energy this time. Side conversations stopped. Staffers looked up. Even lawmakers who had been distracted by papers or phones redirected their attention toward the sound. Greene had that effect. When she leaned into a moment, the room followed. The discussion began drifting. Not directly away from policy, but close enough that everyone felt it. The edges of the debate softened. Language became less technical, more pointed. The chair offered a brief reminder about order, a routine statement meant to keep things moving smoothly. It landed like a warning. Still, the tension didn't break. It thickened. Crockett leaned slightly toward her microphone, then stopped. She didn't press the button. The movement was small, almost unnoticeable, but cameras notice everything. In rooms like this, even hesitation can signal intent. Greene continued, her confidence visible. Her words came faster now, sharper, less filtered. The hearing room no longer felt neutral, it felt charged. Some lawmakers exchanged glances, others stared straight ahead, as if refusing to acknowledge what was forming in the space between sentences. Everyone understood the same unspoken truth. Hearings can turn into headlines in seconds. The chair attempted to redirect the conversation back to its official focus, but momentum had already shifted. The discussion was no longer just about documents or testimony. It was becoming something else, something more personal, more unpredictable. Crockett finally reached for her microphone again. This time, she didn't pull away. She didn't speak immediately, she waited. The pause was deliberate, and it changed the energy of the room, because silence, when chosen intentionally, has weight. It forces attention, it demands listening. For a brief moment, the room held still. No one yet realized what this hearing was about to become. No one knew that the cameras were seconds away from capturing a moment that would be replayed across the country. But the shift had already begun. The calm before the moment was ending. And once it ended, there would be no returning to routine. As the hearing continued, the room's energy subtly shifted. What had started as routine, almost background politics, was now charged with anticipation. Every glance, every movement, every adjustment of papers seemed to carry weight. Crockett remained composed. Her calmness wasn't passive, it was intentional. She wasn't reacting immediately to Greene's bold interruptions. Instead, she observed, calculating the precise moment to speak. That quiet patience created a tension far more compelling than any raised voice could. Greene, on the other hand, maintained her assertive posture, fingers tapping on documents, leaning into her microphone, eyes scanning the room for reactions. Her energy was unmistakable, forceful, direct, unfiltered. For the audience watching, the contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side, controlled authority, measured words. On the other, raw, confrontational presence, unpredictable in tone. Both women commanded attention, but in entirely different ways. A small interruption broke the rhythm of the hearing. A colleague raised a procedural point, a reminder that decorum still mattered. Yet the moment wasn't diffused. The subtle clash of personalities had already begun to dominate the room. Every observer felt it, even those who hadn't followed the agenda closely. Crockett leaned slightly toward her microphone, careful, deliberate. She wasn't rushing. She didn't need to. In fact, the delay amplified the effect. Her patience spoke louder than words. And then she began to speak. Calm, steady, measured. Every word precise, every phrase intentional. Her tone carried authority without aggression. It was a reminder that presence and composure can be more powerful than interruption and heat. Across the room, Greene responded instinctively. Her words came faster now, sharper, less restrained. She was defending her space, asserting her energy. But the room had already started to shift. The balance of attention had changed. Crockett's next sentences were not reactive. They were deliberate, crafted to redirect focus back to professionalism, responsibility, and the broader purpose of the hearing. She acknowledged the friction without escalating it, creating a silent but clear line. Personal attacks have no place in public office. The chair tapped the gavel lightly, a procedural reminder. But for the audience paying close attention, it was clear. The real story wasn't the gavel, or the agenda. It was the dynamic between these two women. Crockett spoke about respect, about accountability, about how lawmakers' behavior shapes public perception. Each word landed with weight because of the calm delivery. Her voice carried clarity, focus, and subtle power. Greene leaned forward again, ready to respond. But the energy in the room had subtly shifted. What had once been raw assertiveness now had to navigate measured authority. Every word mattered more. Every gesture was amplified. The camera lenses captured micro-expressions, the smallest eye movements, the slight tightening of hands, the nods of acknowledgement from other committee members. The tension was no longer just audible. It was visual, palpable, almost tangible. Crockett continued, her tone unwavering. She didn't attack. She didn't shout. Instead, she guided, reminded, clarified. She shaped the conversation in a way that commanded attention and respect, without raising her voice. Outside the room, one could imagine the ripple effect. Clips would be shared. Commentary would emerge. People would analyze tone, posture, timing, and all of it stemmed from the careful, deliberate narration of this moment. By maintaining her composure, Crockett set a benchmark. The audience watching understood that power isn't about speaking the loudest. It's about controlling the room through presence, precision, and patience. Even as the hearing continued with policy questions and standard procedure, the moment between Crockett and Greene had already created an invisible divide in the room. Observers leaned in. Staffers paused. The camera didn't blink. And in that calm, steady tone, Crockett's message was clear. Personal remarks may provoke, but measured authority defines the outcome.
The tension in the room was no longer subtle. What had begun as careful observation now moved into a charged exchange. Greene's voice rose just slightly, not loud, but sharp, assertive, demanding attention. Her gestures were deliberate, pointing to documents, emphasizing points, scanning the room for reactions. Crockett remained calm, her composure unchanged. She didn't interrupt, she didn't escalate. She waited. And in that waiting, she drew focus. Every listener, every camera lens, every observer in the room noticed it. The quiet before a decisive moment. A personal remark landed. It wasn't about policy, it wasn't procedural. It was pointed, personal, the kind of comment that crosses invisible lines in a professional debate. For a split second, the room froze. Eyes shifted. Papers paused mid-turn. Staffers glanced at one another. The atmosphere, already thick with anticipation, became electric. Everyone sensed that the hearing had left routine behind. Crockett leaned forward slightly. She pressed her microphone button, but still she didn't speak immediately. She inhaled slowly, carefully, letting the room settle. That pause, that deliberate stillness, made every ear in the room strain to listen. And then she spoke, calm, measured, confident. Her words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Every sentence cut through the tension because they were precise, controlled, and grounded in authority. She addressed the direction the discussion had taken, reminding everyone of decorum, professionalism, and the responsibility inherent in public office. Greene reacted instinctively. Quick words, sharper tone, an attempt to reclaim the energy. But the room had already shifted. Crockett's controlled response wasn't just a reaction, it was a statement. The back-and-forth rhythm formed. Interruptions flickered across the room, light procedural reminders from the chair, subtle shifts in posture from other lawmakers. But Crockett's tone never wavered. Calmness had become her strength. Each phrase she spoke reinforced her presence. Respect, accountability, boundaries, these weren't just concepts she mentioned. They were tangible, felt by everyone listening. The personal remark, meant to provoke, had inadvertently highlighted Crockett's control. The audience in the room, from staffers to committee members, began to adjust. Conversation slowed, papers rustled quietly, eyes turned forward, cameras didn't blink. The room was witnessing a teaching moment, how composure can outweigh aggression, how patience can define authority. Greene's confidence was still visible, but now mixed with subtle caution. Every word she spoke carried the awareness that the room was no longer just listening, it was evaluating. Crockett spoke again, reinforcing her earlier point with clarity and calm precision. No raised voices, no dramatics, just steady authority. Each pause between her sentences amplified her presence, making her points land even heavier. It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It had become a moment that would be replayed, shared, analyzed. Every gesture, every phrase, every deliberate pause contributed to a story that transcends the procedural discussion. And then the room exhaled, slightly, imperceptibly, because everyone knew the balance had changed. The confrontation wasn't over, but the narrative had shifted. Crockett had set the tone. Greene's energy was still present, but the measure of authority now belonged to composure and calm clarity. Outside the room, one could imagine the ripple effect beginning. Short clips being shared online, social media reactions, commentary highlighting the power of restraint over reaction. The moment was becoming larger than the hearing itself. Crockett's calm tone, her measured words, and her poised presence had not just answered a personal remark, they had defined the exchange. This wasn't about winning a debate with volume or speed. It was about shaping perception, about guiding attention, about demonstrating the kind of authority that resonates far beyond the room. For the first time, everyone present, and everyone watching, realized the hearing had become a defining moment, not because of policy disagreements, but because of the quiet, precise, unwavering control of one lawmaker in the face of provocation.
By the time the hearing moved past the confrontation, the atmosphere in the room had permanently shifted. What began as procedural discussion had transformed into a lesson in restraint, authority, and the subtle art of commanding attention. Crockett's measured responses had left an impression, not just on Greene, not just on the committee members, but on everyone present. Outside the hearing room, the ripple began almost immediately. Clips of the exchange,
Particularly the calm, deliberate way Crockett addressed the personal remark started circulating on social media. Viewers who hadn't been following the hearing from the start were drawn in by a moment of clarity, control, and professionalism. Newsrooms picked up the story. Analysts dissected the exchange, comparing styles, debating tactics, and exploring the subtle power dynamics at play. The calm composure of Crockett contrasted sharply with Greene's bold, assertive approach, making for an instant talking point across political commentary platforms. The viral moment wasn't just about the words spoken, it was about how they were delivered. Every pause, every slight movement, every intentional inflection had been captured by cameras, magnified by social media, and shared across countless channels. What had been a single exchange in a committee room became a national conversation. Crockett's approach set a precedent. Calm authority proved more compelling than aggressive interruption. Patience outweighed impulse. The public saw not just a confrontation, they saw how professionalism could redefine an entire moment. Supporters praised her strategy. They highlighted how her ability to remain composed in the face of provocation showcased leadership qualities often overlooked in politics. Critics debated the interaction as well, but even then, attention was centered on the power of controlled response, not personal attack. Media coverage expanded rapidly. Short clips highlighted key moments, the pause before speaking, the deliberate clarity of words, the way she maintained eye contact while addressing the tension. Every detail contributed to the narrative that composure and confidence can outshine confrontation. The exchange became a reference point. In classrooms, in discussion panels, in editorial commentary, people cited the hearing as an example of how moments in public office are defined as much by delivery and demeanor as by content. Back in the committee room, life returned to a sense of routine. Papers were shuffled, microphones adjusted, and policy questions resumed. But the memory of the confrontation lingered. Committee members, staffers, and even the chair carried the awareness that the dynamics of attention had shifted. Every observer had internalized the lesson. Presence and restraint hold real power. For the audience online, the moment took on a life of its own. Clips were remixed, analyzed, and replayed. Political commentators debated style versus substance. Social media users compared strategies, and all of it revolved around a single, calm, precise response to provocation. Crockett's calm authority became emblematic. It was a reminder that moments don't need loud volume to be heard. They need clarity, intention, and composure. Even as political debates rage on, this moment served as an example of how measured control can influence perception far beyond a single hearing. Greene continued her schedule as well, speaking to supporters, engaging in public discourse. Her bold style remained unchanged. Yet the viral exchange had established a clear narrative that quiet precision often carries more weight than overt aggression. And for those watching, the lesson was unmistakable. In politics, in public life, in every space where words and behavior matter, control of presence, not just words, defines who leads the conversation. The hearing had started as routine. It ended as a defining moment of composure, strategy, and influence. As the hearing drew to its formal close, a quiet settled over the committee room. Papers were gathered, microphones were turned off, and the usual sounds of procedural discussion resumed. But anyone paying attention knew the atmosphere had changed permanently. The exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Marjorie Taylor Greene had left an imprint, not just on the participants, but on the observers, staffers, and cameras that had captured every moment. Crockett, composed as always, gathered her materials and prepared to leave. Her movements were deliberate, calm, almost understated. She did not need to raise her voice to make an impact. Every gesture, every expression had already told the story. That calm authority, maintained throughout the confrontation, had become the defining memory of the day. Outside the committee room, reporters and staffers waited, phones raised, cameras focused. The moment had already traveled beyond the walls of the room, and everyone present knew it. Clips of the exchange were circulating online, shared across platforms, and becoming talking points on morning news shows, social media feeds, and editorial segments. The viral impact was immediate, and the lesson it carried was clear. Composure and measured communication can redefine any encounter, even one filled with tension. Observers reflected on what had just happened. Here was a professional exchange that demonstrated the power of patience and clarity over impulsiveness and aggression. Crockett's calm approach had not only addressed the personal remark, but had reframed the entire hearing. It had shown that leadership is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, deliberate, and unshakable. Political analysts dissected the moment in detail. They examined the timing of pauses, the careful selection of words, the way Crockett maintained eye contact while controlling the rhythm of the conversation. Her response became a masterclass in communication, teaching viewers that the most influential statements are often those delivered without haste, without theatrics, but with precision. Greene's boldness had its own impact, of course. It drew attention, commanded presence, and forced the room to engage. Yet, in contrast, Crockett's restraint highlighted an essential truth about public perception. It is not enough to be assertive. True influence comes from balance, the ability to respond with authority while maintaining composure, especially in moments that test professionalism. For the American public, the viral exchange sparked discussion on a broader scale. People debated the merits of confrontation versus calm reasoning, the importance of decorum in public office, and how political moments can teach lessons that extend beyond policy. Social media users shared and reshared clips, dissecting the subtleties of body language, tone, and timing. The exchange became more than a hearing. It became a cultural moment, one that illustrated how leadership and professionalism intersect. Crockett herself reflected that day on the importance of staying grounded. Public office carries responsibility not just to legislate but to set an example. Every gesture, every word, every pause is visible to millions, and the way one responds in tense moments can shape public trust. Her calm demeanor had reinforced that principle, making the exchange a reference point for both lawmakers and citizens alike. As time passed, the hearing was discussed in classrooms, newsrooms, and editorial panels. Political science students analyzed the tactics, communications experts highlighted the techniques, and ordinary viewers marveled at the clarity and control displayed. The exchange was dissected not for conflict, but for leadership, a subtle, nuanced example of how influence is wielded with precision rather than force. Greene continued her political activities in her usual bold style, but the viral moment remained attached to Crockett. It was a lesson in how restraint can amplify authority, how calm responses can leave lasting impressions, and how measured communication can transform what might otherwise be seen as a minor exchange into a defining moment. The committee continued its work, policies were discussed, and testimony proceeded. But the lessons of that day remained embedded in the consciousness of all present. Professionalism, clarity, patience, these qualities had been demonstrated in real time, under the scrutiny of cameras and observers alike. The moment had become a benchmark, a silent guide for future hearings and debates. Looking back, it was clear why this exchange resonated so widely. It reminded everyone that political discussions are not just about winning arguments. They are about influence, perception, and example. Crockett's measured tone, deliberate pauses, and controlled responses had transformed the hearing into a teaching moment, one that would echo far beyond the immediate room. By the evening, media coverage had expanded. Opinion pieces, commentary videos, and social media discussions all highlighted the same point. Leadership is often quiet, subtle, and intentional. The viral moment illustrated the power of calm authority in a world accustomed to loud confrontation. And so, the exchange became part of the public memory, not as a heated fight, not as a personal attack, but as a study in poise and professionalism under pressure. Crockett's composure served as a model for lawmakers, students, communicators, and viewers who sought to understand how influence and authority truly operate. In the end, the hearing concluded in its normal procedural fashion. Papers were collected, microphones powered down, and the participants departed. Yet the impact of that brief, intense exchange would continue to resonate. Lessons about presence, patience, and the subtle power of calm would be referenced, replayed, and studied. The room returned to routine, but the lesson had been permanently recorded in history, captured in viral clips, and carried forward as an example of leadership in action.